Hey guys, how we doing? Welcome back to Listography. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the like button if you like it, but most importantly, as always, comment below. Always looking to get some good music conversation going down in the comments. Now before we get into the list today, I just want to say a couple of things. In about 10 days here, I'm going to be going back to school actually. Also going to keep working full time, so I'm going to be pretty busy. Probably won't be seeing quite as many videos come out on the channel over the next few months, but don't worry, I didn't go anywhere. Still going to try to put out as many videos as possible. To kind of combat the busyness of my schedule, probably going to be trying to do some shorter format videos, cover some bands with smaller discographies, as well as work on some ideas for other types of shows that I can do on the channel. Working on a few ideas in my head. Gonna continue my favorite guitarist series. I already did my favorite 20 classic rock guitarists. Probably going to do an episode on my favorite indie, alternative, underground guitarists, as well as an episode on current guitarists that I really like. I also want to do a list on some more modern songwriters. Right now the idea is to maybe do my top 25 favorite songwriters of the 21st century. Maybe doing a series where I choose to highlight 5 albums that fit into a certain theme. So if you have any input, definitely looking for ideas. You can throw those down in the comments below. But now to the task at hand today, we are going to be looking at the 9-album discography of Steely Dan. Steely Dan is a band that I've been listening to intermittently for a long time. My dad had the Citizen box set, which had their original 7 albums. I think it was on 4 or 5 CDs. So I would check that out from time to time. They were never a favorite band of mine, but I always had a few songs by them that I really enjoyed. But I've found over the past maybe 6 months or so that I've been enjoying them more and more, and thought this would be a good time to rank the records here on the channel. Alright, so at number 9, my least favorite Steely Dan album is the most recent, Everything Must Go. The 2 records from Steely Dan's second act still sound great. They have great instrumental performances on them, but the songs themselves just aren't quite as memorable as the songs from the band's initial run. You've got Walter Becker taking lead vocal on one track here, so I suppose that's notable. Not a whole lot else to say about this one. Pixeline is probably my favorite track on this album, but on the whole, this one just doesn't stack up to their classic records. At number 8, I'm going with Two Against Nature, which was the first of their reunion albums. They returned in the year 2000 after a 20-year absence. My criticisms of this record are pretty much the same as Everything Must Go. It sounds great, the performances are great, the songs have all the elements of the former great Steely Dan tunes, but they just don't really stick. Overall, it's a little more memorable than Everything Must Go. You do have some good songs here. Two Against Nature, Janie Runaway, and Almost Gothic is a pretty good 3-song stretch in the middle of this record. Interestingly, this album won Album of the Year at the Grammys, which, even though I like this record, is kind of absurd. Not because it's a bad record, but because it has almost nothing to do with what was happening in the culture at the time. I don't necessarily think that music should be judged on those terms. I think for any individual to say that this was their favorite album of that year would be totally reasonable. That's just a matter of taste and opinion. But coming from an institution like the Grammys, I expect their Album of the Year selection to hold a little bit of cultural weight. I think for a lot of people, this album winning Album of the Year really highlighted how clueless the Grammys were, especially when they were passing over artists like Radiohead, Beck, and Eminem. Anyways, that's my little Grammy rant. Back to the list. I would be curious to hear if anyone would put either of these 2 albums any higher than the bottom 2 spots. Let me know down below. Alright, now into the band's initial run, their first 7 albums. This one might come as a shocker to a lot of people. This is a pretty well-regarded record in their catalog, but for me, it's the weakest of this period. At number 7, I'm going with The Royal Scam. Since their inception, Steely Dan had always fused pop, rock, and jazz in a really unique way. To me, that recipe that they had perfected on their previous albums goes a little bit out of balance on this record. The rock edge starts to fade from their sound, and everything smooths out a little bit too much. I know a lot of people really love this album, but it feels a little stuffy to me, and the songs just really don't connect with me that much. People always cite Kid Charlemagne as one of the great Dan tracks, but I don't know, it doesn't do a lot for me. Even the guitar solo on that track, which some people rank among the greatest guitar solos of all time, to me pales in comparison to some of the solos on earlier Dan records. There are tracks here that I enjoy, like Caves of Altamira, Sign In Stranger, and The Fez, but on the whole, this is definitely the classic period Steely Dan album that I feel compelled to listen to the least often. At number 6, I'm going with Gaucho. Now, with both Asia and this album, the two albums that came after the Royal Scam, Steely Dan continued to get smoother and jazzier, but I much prefer the mix, arrangements, and songs on both Gaucho and Asia to the Royal Scam. The songs on this record are a bit more direct, with strong pop choruses, but where Gaucho really shines is in the mix. It's really crisp and clear sounding. The female backing vocals sound great. My favorite tracks from this record are Hey 19 and the title track Gaucho. Now, in my opinion, Steely Dan has 5 great albums. All of those other ones that I've talked about so far are good, but these next 5 are the ones that I think you really want to check out if you're new to Steely Dan. It was really difficult to put these 5 in order, but at number 5 I'm going to go with Pretzel Logic. This album opens with the excellent Ricky Don't Lose That Number, which is probably one of my top 5 favorite Steely Dan tunes. Love the guitar solo on it, courtesy of Jeff Skunk Baxter. Any Major Dude Will Tell You and Berrytown are excellent tracks as well. With a Gun is also really cool, kind of a different track in their discography. It's kind of like a country tune put through the Steely Dan filter. Not a lot to say about this record. It doesn't really differentiate itself a lot from the rest of their catalog in any major way. It's pretty much what you'd expect from a Steely Dan record. They're not a band with a lot of crazy detours in their catalog. They just kind of do their thing, but this is a really solid set of songs. At number 4, I'm going with their debut record, Cant Buy A Thrill. This is the record that introduced the world to the extremely unique sounds of Steely Dan. There are a lot of really great songs on this record. Of course, you have the hits, Reelin' in the Years, Do It Again, and Dirty Work. Midnight Cruiser is great as well. This album also has what is probably my all-time favorite Steely Dan track, and it's not a track that gets a lot of mention usually, which is very surprising to me. I love the song Kings. There are so many good tracks here. You could easily make an argument for this being the best Steely Dan record, except for the fact that the band seems a little bit unsure of its direction on this first record. They try out some different singers on various tracks, which doesn't really work that well. Do It Again into Dirty Work is kind of jarring. Still, great songs from start to finish. At number 3, I have the record that a lot of people consider to be Steely Dan's masterpiece, Asia. Asia takes the band's sound even further into a kind of a smooth jazz, fusion-y territory. On the album that preceded it, The Royal Scam, the band were maybe too concerned with making a very sophisticated record. To me, at least, The Royal Scam feels a little bit like it's being highbrow for highbrow's sake. And on Gaucho, the album that followed Asia, their quest for studio perfection and spot-on performances perhaps led to the record feeling a little bit stiff and lifeless, even though that's still a great sounding record. Although quite similar musically to those records, Asia is a far more exciting and captivating experience. Some of the best studio musicians that are just given the freedom to cut loose a bit. The playing on this record is absolutely disgusting. Check out the drum and sax solos on the title cut. You also have Deacon Blues, Peg, and Josie, which are some of the band's most accessible tunes. But my favorite song on the record has got to be I Got the News. But this is a great record in just about every way. Killer performances, great sounding mix, and it's one of the band's better batch of songs. At number 2, I have Katy Lied. Anytime you put a Steely Dan record on, you're guaranteed to hear some great sounding recordings and incredible musicianship. That's the case with all 9 of their records. So it makes it a little hard to talk about their albums and have different things to say about each of them because they're all quite similar in style. The differences between them lie mostly in the quality of the songs. and Katy Lied is a great collection of tunes. Memorable, melodic, great choruses. My favorite songs on this record are Black Friday, Bad Sneakers, Rose Darling, and Your Gold Teeth 2. But this record is really just solid from front to back. And at number 1, I'm going with Countdown to Ecstasy. Again, just a great set of songs. Probably the most enjoyable set of tunes from front to back in their discography for me. But on top of that, this album also rocks a little bit harder than any other Steely Dan record. Steely Dan at this point was still a band and hadn't fully turned into a Walter Becker, Donald Fagen project quite yet. It makes a big difference. There's a definite live feel to this album. It feels a bit more organic and less stitched together by endless overdubbing. I think this is the perfect album for newbies to test the waters with as well and kind of see if they're into Steely Dan. My favorite tracks on this record are Bodhisattva, Razor Boy, Showbiz Kids, My Old School, and The Pearl of the Quarter because I'm a sucker for pedal steel. But yeah, that's my favorite Steely Dan record, and that does it for my Steely Dan listography. Again, don't forget to comment below. Tell me what you thought of my list. What are your favorite Steely Dan records? Tell me what I got wrong. And also give me some ideas for future shows that I can put together without a whole ton of effort. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that. And we will see you next time. Thanks for watching.